And I'm going to talk a little bit about Iceland, this amazing country to the north of us. And it doesn't matter where you are in the UK, flight wise, you're only about 2.5 or 3 hours away from Iceland. So it's a really quite convenient English speaking country. It's well organized. It's very much up for the tourist. The the road systems are very good. The hotels are lovely and warm, full of geothermal activity to keep us nice and warm. So it's the ideal place to be. We're not going to talk about the weather because the weather's something entirely different. But Iceland is a choice location. The Iceland flag is blue for the ocean, white for the snow, red for the fire, the volcano activity. And Naturetrek actually runs several trips during the year, and the earlier trips, sort of around about February, March time, not surprisingly, we'll see quite wintry conditions. The glaciers are there all year round, and of course, Iceland houses the largest glacier in Europe. But anytime you go, you can always see a little bit of snow, a little bit of ice, and some wonderful, wonderful scenery. The earlier trips tend not to see much in the way of small birds, and indeed, the snow bunting is really the only small passerine we see in good numbers on this occasion, of course, trying to get some warmth off this roof. Most of the photographs you see are mine. There was one or two others, which I will mention as we go along. When you're in Iceland, and if you think you've seen a crow, it's going to be a raven. It's the only sort of corvid that's common there, and they are quite numerous. And when you see how cold the conditions are there in the winter, you realize how tough some of these birds must be. The black guillemot is probably fairly familiar to many people in its sort of dark plumage with white wing flashes. But in the winter, some of them go this gorgeous white or silver color. So what an opportunity to see something like that in the middle of winter. Purple sandpipers are one of many shorebirds that flock to Iceland. Although there's a breeding population of waders, there's also a significant wintering one as well. And the purple sandpiper, albeit scarce in the UK, is pretty common in Iceland and relatively easy to see. A lot of the early trips, February, March time, we look at see if we can see the northern lights with varying degrees of success, but we've had quite a lot of success in recent years. But the big highlight for me is to see these beasts, the orca or the killer whale. And I think many of us, when we're traveling naturalists, we think about how we love to see an elephant or a tiger or a leopard or something. But for me, the orca, the killer whale, is pretty much as good as it gets. And what we try to do on the early trips, February, March time, is get out onto a boat, one of the whale watching boats, get out into one of the big fjords and try and encounter some of these amazing pods of killer whales. Sometimes 3 or 4 pods hunting together, chasing the herring down and pretty much totally ignoring us. So if you really want to see one of the most dramatic animals in the world, this is definitely one of the best places to go. The bird that everybody wants to see, but it's a tricky one, is the gyrfalcon. I managed to photograph this one just as it had flown up with a little bit of ptarmigan in its talons. So, yeah, the winter is a proper winter scene, and we always use 9-seater minibuses when we're traveling around Iceland. In the winter months, we tend to have proper tires, proper winter tires, which provides us an opportunity of getting around, even in some of the worst conditions. Iceland represents an opportunity for photography, and even now the conditions sometimes are a little bit grey, a little bit grainy. Most photographers love the opportunity of taking photographs of landscape photographs. And of course, Iceland is a relatively young country. It was only populated about 1100 years ago by the Vikings. It still only has a population of less than 400,000, of which at least 60% still live in the capital and away from the country areas. So it's unspoiled. We haven't ruined this country yet. It's a marvelous place to go to see nature in the raw, really, with lava beds, mountains, glaciers, black sand beaches, icebergs. It's so dramatic. And of course, we have this geothermal activity, which you can smell as well as see. And a colleague of mine, Dave Jackson, who goes to Iceland more than me, he's had various opportunities of seeing some additional stuff, which I'll come on to. It's definitely a place of waterfalls. Some of the most powerful waterfalls in Europe are open all year round. They're even more dramatic, possibly in February and March when they're all iced up, but still hugely impressive. We have an opportunity going around pseudo craters and also the big calderas of the big volcanoes, such as this one near Lake Mitavan. And Dave actually managed to photograph this amazing scene. This actually happened during a Naturetrek tour when, quite rightly, he changed the itinerary and captured this image of a recent volcano eruption. we don't get that close because we're from Naturetrek. But at the end of the day, what an opportunity, and what a scene that he had before him. Of course, the wildlife is there in profusion. Birds are there in large numbers, not huge numbers of species in the spring, but we've got lots and lots of redwings, Icelandic redwings, and the common snipe are drumming all over the place, all over the moors, and all over the areas of the wilder parts of the island. Breeding waders come in large numbers, so golden plovers use the moors and the heather areas to breed in large numbers, birds that we often only see at a distance during the winter. Lake Mitavan and other such places are the location for marvellous views of some of our more difficult to see ducks in Britain. So the long-tailed duck comes to breed in places such as this. And if you like redneck phalaropes, there's no better place. And these things just are just wandering around at your feet. So if you like little beautiful, very very chirpy little birds that come towards you, then it's definitely the place for you. And excellent photographic opportunities. So some of the ducks, Barrow's goldeneye. Iceland represents the only European outpost for seeing a Barrow's goldeneye. It's essentially a North American duck. And the Axa River provides our best opportunity, a place that we go to on all the spring trips to see the Harlequin duck as well as the Barrow's goldeneye. A marvellous river, completely unspoilt. And with the big hatch of flies that occurs late in June, this is why these ducks go there, in order to ensure that their ducklings have plenty to feed on. If you're a Laradophile, if you're a bit of a gull specialist, then I suppose the glaucous gull is the one you want to see. And it's in summer plumage and it breeds in reasonable numbers. Strangely enough, the Iceland gull is actually quite rare in Iceland. It's there as a winter visitor. Only very few pairs actually breed there. So any big white-winged gull you're going to see in Iceland tends to be the glaucous gull. So what's the food like in Iceland? Well, I'm not putting ptarmigan up there just to talk about food, but the food in Iceland is surprisingly good. People are a little bit concerned when they hear about fermented shark or whale meat, and even eating puffins. But what we've found in our recent tours is the vegetarians are well catered for. Gluten-free is well catered for as well. Still a bit of an issue about vegans. So people who are following that trait still struggling to try and get some food in Iceland. But in general, very healthy diet, very good food, good quality. And of course, with the geothermal activity, they're growing a lot of their own vegetables themselves. Female ptarmigan then did a bit of dust bathing, followed by the male. And this actually took place in a hotel car park, can you believe? No climbing mountains here. These birds are at sea level. So if you want to see some lovely birds close to, why not come to Iceland and see a ptarmigan? Seabirds, particularly numerous in the breeding season, black-legged kittiwake or kittiwake. You see those in good numbers, and even in the winter, they are there in their tens of thousands feeding on the very fish-rich waters around the coast. On our spring trips, we make every effort to go out on a small ferry to the Isle of Flatey. That's not just the isle on the left-hand side, that's just a rock. But on the Isle of Flatey, not only do we see good views of birds, but we get extra close to them. So again, a photographic wonderment really of redshanks, whimbrel, Arctic terns, and a variety of other birds right down at your feet. So again, what a wonderful opportunity to see these gorgeous things, completely unconcerned about our presence. And there are a few places, I think, in the world where you can see this kind of detail on wading birds. So I've talked a lot about birds. I've talked a little bit about food. I'm not going to mention the weather. The weather can be quite variable, but generally not as cold as wet as people often consider. The only native land animal is this little chap, which is the Arctic fox. And we do get the white varieties, the dark varieties, and the blue varieties. We don't see many of these. And in fact, if you read the book, it says that we shouldn't really be seeing them on our tours. And they are supposed to be off to the west. But Naturetrek being Naturetrek, we have been seeing Arctic foxes on all our trips now. And so as a consequence, we actually now realize they're all over the country. The Icelandic people are very, very proud of their, what they call Icelandic horses. They're ponies really, but they call them Icelandic horses. And this is almost a form of currency. You'll see these horses out in all weathers, very hardy beasts, and they're very highly prized. Interestingly, although the horses are out all year round, the sheep, the cattle, and the pigs you just don't see during the winter. They're all barned up, and lamb stew is definitely one of the favoured meals or favoured dishes in Iceland. So I'm sorry, little lamb, but your days may be numbered. But yeah, certainly in the summer, you'll see lots of sheep joining the other animals. There are some reindeer in the east of the country which have been introduced and they're spreading. There are mink in the country which shouldn't be there, and also there are wood mice that have become super wood mice. But really, there are no other mammals other than the sea mammals. Yes, that's another glaucous gull. That's only because I'm a Laradophile myself. On the spring trips, we make every effort to try and find you some puffins. There are several colonies we can go to, which normally afford really good views. And there are other auks and cliff nesting birds as well, such as these marvelous fulmars, which just ride those wind thermals so well. If you like your ducks, you'll probably like your geese. Pink-footed geese nest in quite good numbers. We get nice and close to them. Barnacle geese, grey-lag geese are there as well. And the paler phase of the Brent goose, the pale-bellied Brent goose, move through migration in the hundreds and thousands. What's not to like about this bird? Lake Mitavan in particular gives you an ample opportunity to get very close to breeding water birds, and they're so used to people that they just don't care. They're really not concerned about your presence. And again, even a mobile phone will take a really good photograph of one of these gorgeous little Slavonian grebes. There's an opportunity of seeing some of the people culture around the country as well. So lots of really good museums. In Reykjavik itself, this is a cathedral. Lots of other things to do other than just wildlife and seeing the amazing landscape. Very proud people, obviously sort of from a Nordic background, now very independent, and they very much seem to have got over the 2009 financial crash. Everywhere you go, it's credit cards. It's very convenient, and almost cash is sort of frowned upon when you produce it. Sea mammals, we looked at orca. The harbour seal or the common seal, which is very similar to our animal. That's quite common around the coast areas. But of course, the other animals we want to see is some more cetaceans, please. So what we tend to do later in the year in the spring trips is try and get out to Husavik, which is in the north of the country. And we will endeavour to get out into a lovely big bay, which has got nearly always some big whales which are in it feeding. So this boat you can see is a little bit small, is the more typical mode of transport that we use out there. We've also been using sail ships, a tall ship that's currently being serviced, but normally you'll use that, which is a nice silent craft and gets us out there in amongst it. And this is what we want to see. This is the big, wonderful humpback whale. Of all the big whales, perhaps the humpback whale is the one that actually really performs for us. We do get an opportunity on most occasions to get very close to these big animals as they just cavort in front of us, really don't care about us being there at all. And yes, they're just showing off another fluke. So absolutely gorgeous animals. It's a privilege to be close to them. And whilst we're out there, if there aren't any humpback whales, because they're not there all the time, there's always a chance of minke whales. We've had white-beaked dolphins, harbour porpoises, and quite recently a stunning view of a blue whale which came into the bay as well. So a big part of these trips is trying to get in on the whale watching trips, and it's normally one of the highlights of our tours out there. Just a few images of some of the birds there. We talked about some of the seabirds. To be in amongst a colony of 1,000 Arctic terns is always a wondrous thing. Unlike some places in the UK, these birds don't seem to really attack you. They just simply accept you. It's a little bit different to it is in the UK. And these wonderful sort of swallows of the sea, of course, have that reputation of flying from the Antarctic to the Arctic just for us to see and value them. Iceland is the venue for many birds to come to breed, but it's actually also a place where things pass through. So the sanderlings in summer plumage will be on its way to the high Arctic. Turnstones will be following them as well. And there's even an opportunity of getting sort of passing birds such as a sabine's go on its way to Svalbard or somewhere like that. In Iceland, as in many places in the UK, eider down is still collected, so you'll find that there are little flags all over little bay areas and coastal areas, signifying people protecting the eiders to produce the eider down. But there's still enough eider down to incubate the eggs and to produce the ducklings. And eiders are very much protected all the way around the coast of Iceland, and we always have fabulous views of them. Sorry, couldn't help myself. Had to put another redneck phalarope in there. Lovely female. This one isn't sitting on a nest. She actually came and walked right up to my feet, and I had to walk 3 foot backwards to get away from her. It's a strange behavior when you see the females rushing around trying to mate with the males, because of course in the gender wars, it's the female, it's the dominant bird of the two. Photographers amongst us will always want to get the photograph of the snipe on the fence post or on the wall, and here there is an opportunity for that to happen. So yes, we do make efforts to try and use the minibuses as mobile hides to try and get as close as we can to our favourite subjects. And who doesn't love a redwing, particularly a redwing with a youngster in tow? So the Icelandic redwings breed in large numbers, not just in trees and willows and dwarf birches, etc., but also in the lupin beds. So there's lots of bright lupins there in the spring, which are not a native flower, but nevertheless have spread all around the island. Waders I mentioned already, but what can be better than a gorgeous Icelandic race black-tailed godwit? And these are quite numerous, and we do see good numbers of these. I mentioned ducks, so I showed you a picture of a long-tailed duck, Barrow's golden-eye, but there's surface-feeding ducks there as well, and the widgeon and the pintail and a whole variety of other birds that are there, particularly around Lake Mitavan. Passerines a little bit few and far between. This is the Icelandic common redpoll. Bird that's quite difficult to see outside Iceland. Just finishing off the last couple of slides, but I couldn't resist putting a wonderful great northern diver in. And in Iceland, there are some very large freshwater lakes, which provide breeding opportunities for these wonderful yodeling great northern divers with that gorgeous deep red eye. Absolutely stunning birds, and on all the spring trips we tend to see these in rather good numbers, all in resplendent summer plumage. And on the smaller lakes, particularly the small areas of water alongside the road, red-throated divers abound as well, and they nest in some profusion. I'm sure they don't think much of the Arctic foxes which are wandering around, but nevertheless the red-throated divers seem to produce good numbers of young. So I'm just going to sort of conclude with just a few sort of significant well, messages really about Iceland. Yes, the weather can be a little bit tricky. It can be a little bit breezy. It can be a little bit cool. Even in the summer, you can get the occasional snow flurry. But at the same time, just like in the UK, you can get long periods of sunshine as well. Blue skies, huge vistas, amazing views. And if you're really fortunate, and I was fortunate on this occasion once, you get a cracking view of a falcon whizzing past, Iceland's national bird.